Welcome to the Working Without Waste podcast, powered by ERC Midwest, the podcast that's all about sharing ideas and stories that can increase productivity and decrease waste in your business and personal life. On today's episode, I have Dr. Madan Kandula, the CEO and founder of Advent. Advent is an independent medical practice that unleashes your potential as it relates to your ear, nose, and throat.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Kandula and I have done previous podcasts on my other show, and we dug into a lot of things, but one of the things we didn't get to was sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And sleep, you hear that sleep is, the most important thing for your overall health and for your productivity and for a great life. And so many people don't sleep well, at least apparently.
Right.
So since you're an expert in that, I am so happy to have you on the show today. So welcome.
Thank you.
And before we started recording, we were actually talking about this term that you came up with and trademarked called the breathing triangle. And maybe that's a good place to sort of get us started after you say a little bit about how you got started and where Advent came from.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, so I'm a physician by training and started Advent back in 2004. I'm an ENT physician, so that's my specialty, and started as a general ENT practice. And then over time, over the years since we started, what I began to recognize is that the patients that we could treat and help didn't understand that there were actually solutions for the issues that they were dealing with until they got in front of me and we talked through things and looked at things. And then it became sort of an epiphany moment where, people don't know that there are things we can do to really, really help. And then really part of the growth of our practice was taking the bull by the horns and saying people should know that, and people should have an opportunity to improve upon their lives should they want to. And one foot in front of the other kind of led us to really growing because people really gravitate to this concept. I mean, you hinted at it with the breathing triangle, is that most of our patients don't know what life is supposed to be like until we identify the problems that are impacting them, get those out of their way, and allow them to rise into their potential, which is on one hand rewarding and immensely rewarding as a business and as a medical practice, but on the other hand disappointing in the lack of awareness. And so the breathing triangle term is something we were struggling. We still struggle because people don't know that term yet. They will, because we're going to make sure that everybody understands that concept. But it's really, breathing triangle is the nose and the throat. You've got 3 holes in your head that you can breathe through, your 2 nostrils and your mouth. And if those areas are working, you can live your life to the fullest. If those areas are not working, your life is diminished by definition. And so that's simple, that clear. And then the nice thing for what we do as a practice is we can really help people and provide solutions in an office-based approach. We can do things in the office to provide solutions for issues that are really, really massively impactful.
So what was the thing that was keeping people unaware? You mentioned not having an awareness several times. So if someone can't breathe well, you'd think they're aware of that, obviously, but they were unaware that there was help, is what I'm taking away from what you were saying, or what was it?
Yeah, or even just the problem to begin with. I think a lot of people
like they get used to it, you mean? Or
that's all they've ever known. If you just imagine a world where say your whole life you can only breathe through your left nostril. And I mean, there's millions of people like this, and from birth, and you go through life breathing through your right. You can't breathe through. I forget what I just said, but let's say one nostril is down. Say your left nostril is down. You can breathe through your right. Your whole life, that's fine. Okay, you're getting through, and then how are you going to know that that's a problem unless somebody identifies it and corrects it? Now, in this example, you've got the other nostril to breathe through. You can kind of do what you need to do, but there's a reason by design that we have, a nose, and then the only role for the nose is to be the start of your breathing passages. And so out of the gate, if you think about man is not a machine, but I'd say if you think of any machine and you think about things that require oxygen, intake, sorts of thing, and think about your anything that's requiring the interchange of air, and what happens to your furnace if your filter, if you just put a wall up where your filter or where the intake is supposed to be, it's just going to shut down.
Cut the air off, nothing works. Right.
Same thing for a human body is, you have these three areas. Most people walking around the world have some degree of compromise in those areas. And there's a long, I can get into it, but by design, our airways are shrinking over time. And so more and more of us are suffering from these issues, and we don't even know about it until we can correct them. And again, it's actually fascinating when you get kind of beneath the surface there, but current day and age, again, there's so many people who are just sort of needlessly suffering.
And so you mentioned there that over time your breathing naturally, or your ability to breathe naturally, I think you said constricts or gets smaller. Is that due to just a natural aging thing, or what is that?
No, it's not. I wouldn't say it so much as each individual. That's not necessarily the case. As a species, that is the case, which means that over time, do you have your wisdom teeth?
No, I do not.
Do you know anybody who has their wisdom teeth?
Probably not. Well, probably not. But I don't ask many people.
ask around. I've asked that question a few times. Your great grandparents had their wisdom teeth. I'm going deep here, but there's a reason that we have the number of teeth that we have, and our jaws as a species are shrinking. And so as your jaws shrink, your airway shrinks. As your airway shrinks, by definition, it's the same thing. Your nose doesn't work as well.
Oh,
if you think
I never put that together.
If you think of your jaws represent the space that you have, your airway. And so if somebody has a rock solid airway, then they've got room in their mouth for all 32 teeth. And if you don't have a rock solid airway, there's no place for the wisdom teeth to go. And so, again, that's a very, very specific example, but I don't know too many people who have their wisdom teeth. But again, our great-great-grandparents did. And so there's something about in the industrialization of society. I think a lot of this comes back down to diet and things that we're doing, not diet in little kids. So it's actually, we think we're doing them a favor by giving them baby food, but when your jaws are not working properly, things don't develop properly. And then I happen to love an area that sits is the upstairs neighbor to your jaws, which is the nose. So if your jaws are too small, then your nose is too small on the inside, and then you can't breathe. And so it's just all interconnected, and but it's really impactful. Back to sleep, I'd say, the prevalence of snoring is massive. So about 50% of the population snores on a regular basis, and we're talking about the United States. So basically almost 100% of the population is therefore impacted by somebody in the bed who's snoring on a consistent basis. About 25% of the population has sleep apnea, which means that their bodies are literally stopping breathing when they're sleeping at night. And that's scary. It's impactful. It causes other things like diabetes and strokes and heart attacks and things like that. And those things all relate back. The first domino that tipped for anybody who has sleep apnea is their airway, is their breathing triangle. And that's why, but people don't connect those dots there. And so back to diminished lives, I'd say, it's bad to have a life that never reaches its potential. And then I'd say, well, what's worse than that? Well, what's worse to end a life, short. And people's lives are being ended right now because these airway issues, they're not recognized, they're not treated properly. And therefore, people are literally losing their lives, and or their lives that they have are getting shortchanged because they're just not able to function properly. You cannot function properly when we can't breathe, and you can't function properly when you can't sleep. And this breathing triangle is the epicenter where all that's happening.
Okay. So naturally, over time, you can't breathe, you can't sleep, you probably begin to tell yourself, well, your list of I can'ts gets really, really long.
Right.
And then, you probably it starts to impact all of your health, right? And you just
absolutely, yeah. And you don't really know that it's there. This gets back to that because especially the sleep apnea folks, they don't. This is happening when they're sleeping at night. They don't necessarily know that there's anything going on in particular, and nobody ever tells them that that's possible. Nobody ever tells somebody with depression, for instance. If you have depression, you might not have an airway issue or sleep apnea issue, but there's a high correlation there. So wouldn't it be a shame if you had what's considered a mental health issue that actually ends up being tied back to an airway issue when you're sleeping. And it happens all the time. Same thing with anxiety. Just imagine what's the most anxiety provoking thing I could do is if I put my hands around your neck right now and I slowly squeezed and I didn't let you breathe, your heart rate's going to go up. You're going to start sweating. You're going to go into panic mode. We call it fight or flight, because your body has to live.
Right.
That's what's happening with somebody who has sleep apnea. That's what's happening to their body, sometimes thousands of times over the course of a night. And you cannot tell me that that's not going to have an impact on them during the day. But imagine how sad it would be if that person never knew the root cause of what was going on. Imagine that person walking around, in their life, they're tired, they're, it's all sorts of things. Imagine just imagine one night's sleep. Imagine you didn't go to sleep tonight. And I'd say, well, go, see how the next day goes for you. And it's not going to go very well. You're not going to have a good day. You're probably going to be eating crap because that's how your body sort of copes with it. You're not going to exercise. I can almost assure you of that. And you're probably going to have a headache through that. You know what I mean? You're just going to be
compounds.
You're going to be compromised. You're going to be, and then just imagine that every night and never knowing what a good night's sleep is supposed to be like.
And you mentioned snoring and sleep apnea. You just talked a bunch about. I would like you to connect those two for me and for us, because I sort of always connected those as being the same. Like someone who snores has sleep apnea. You actually said, well, I think you said that's not necessarily the case, because 50% of people snore and 25% have sleep apnea. But you actually brought it to the partner level, because when someone snores, they may be sleeping fine,
right?
But their partner's not. So I need a little bit more of an education.
So here, let me to kind of start from building block number one. If you snore or if you have sleep apnea, the issue is coming from your throat 100% of the time.
It's not your nose. Okay.
The throat is the area where the sound is coming from. The throat is the area that your airway is shutting down if you have sleep apnea. So that's where the actual issue is. Now, if you have that issue, if you have sleep apnea, for instance, the likelihood of you having a nose issue, a nose that's too tight, is almost that same. It's not 100%, but it's somewhere in the 80% range. And that shouldn't be a surprise when you think about what we were talking about before. If those jaws are too small, well, the floor of your nose is the roof of your mouth. And so if those areas are too tight, then everything's going to be too tight. And so back to the original question, though, I'd say, snoring and sleep apnea are separate but interrelated, and there's a continuum. So pretty much everybody who has sleep apnea snores. Most people who snore don't have sleep apnea. Everybody who snores or has sleep apnea has narrowness in the back of their throat. That's where the sound is coming from. And so that airway is too tight. And, first thing that happens when the airway is too tight is things start vibrating, because you just get this sort of turbulent flow down there. And so that creates the sound, which is annoying, which is snoring. But then if that tight airway goes the next step and it shuts down, that's sleep apnea. And so, it's this intermixed kind of a thing. You never know. I mean, both are problematic. So I think there's a mistake that people make, which is to say, it's just snoring. It's not a big deal. It's like this polar opposite thing. Well, sleep apnea is bad. Snoring is just kind of annoying. They're both bad. Sleep apnea is one worse than the other? Yeah, sleep apnea is worse than snoring, but snoring is a sign. It's a literal cry of your body when you're sleeping at night that your airway is compromised. When you make that sound, your body is crying to the world that's saying, help me. And yet most people who snore are either poked fun at, are, shunned, are embarrassed, are all these things that happen. Though the truth is, like I said, it's their body crying for help. And then yet, I guess this is where I do have an axe to grind, is if somebody who has these issues reaches out to the medical system to try to seek help, the likelihood for successful treatment is pitiful. It's about 25%. So if you go in for potential sleep apnea, the likelihood of the typical medical model working for you is not high at all. And so you have a lot of people who think they might have issues but are scared to seek help because the system is broken. And so that's part of the entirety of my mission at this point is really getting the word out that these issues are real, impactful, massively undertreated, massively poorly treated, and there's better pathways than what currently exists down the world.
And how much of these problems, snoring, sleep apnea, maybe some of the other disorders, are genetic, and how much of them are environmental or
Nobody really knows because it gets kind of co-mixed. So you think about, we kind of use that example of the person who's not sleeping properly, or you didn't get a good night's sleep last night. What kind of choices are you going to make? And so there are many people who have, I'd say most people who have sleep apnea, it's a genetic issue, and they're genetically predisposed to have that smaller airway. Now, what's going to happen if you have a smaller airway and you're not getting proper sleep? Everybody is going to tend to gain weight over time. So if you're sleep deprived, you're not going to be as active as you should be, and you're going to make poorer choices versus what you otherwise would do potentially. And so then you get this additive effect. You have a narrow airway to begin with, and then all of a sudden we're going to add some weight on that. When you add a little bit of weight, it starts to narrow your airway down further, and you've got this cycle that's going. You've got narrow airway, weight coming on, feeling more tired, more narrowed airway, more weight coming on.
Okay.
And
so the initial cause can be sort of genetic, and then it can compound itself with environmental.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, it's an airway issue. Is sleep apnea is, but that airway issue, and again, I don't think people understand that. I guess even that first concept, I wanted to be very clear when I said it, is that if you have obstructive sleep apnea, it's a throat issue. People don't know that. People have heard the term sleep apnea. I think a lot of people think it's a lung issue. I don't know that. It's just this mystery, and I think there's this sort of assumed knowledge there which doesn't exist. So if you have sleep apnea, it's a throat issue, and it's an airway issue. If you have an airway issue, then it's the chicken and the egg as far as weight gain goes. I think most people, if you took, poll on the street, most people would say, oh, sleep apnea, that's something you get if you're too heavy. And if they just lost a little bit of weight, they wouldn't have sleep apnea. On the flip side, I'd say, well, actually, the chicken and the egg, I think it's flipped, and the underlying issue is an airway issue. Now you have some extra weight. Now, visibly, I mean, again, I'd say the snoring is your body's cry at night that your airway is compromised. Weight gain as a result of sleep apnea is your body's visible evidence. It's the cause, it's the effect and not the cause. Yeah. It's both, though. I mean, absolutely. If you gain weight, it's going to compromise.
You're not
your
helping
airway.
yourself.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. Absolutely.
And what about smoking? What kind of an impact does smoking have?
So it depends. I mean, so from your airway standpoint, smoking doesn't help you any which way. It's really bad on the smaller airways, which are down in your lungs, which everybody knows at this point. But it's really harsh on those upper airways, which is the nose and the throat and even your windpipe there. That lining. So every time somebody takes a drag on a cigarette or really a cigar or anything, for example, there are teeny little microscopic hair cells on the surfaces of the lining on the inside of your nose and your sinuses and downwind from that. Every time you take a drag on a cigarette, you paralyze those little, microscopic little fibers, and then they can't do what their job is, which is to move mucus along. And so when you think about somebody who smokes and you think about, what's their common thread is they're always hacking and coughing, especially in the morning times. Why are they doing that? Because their bodies are getting compromised. Those little hair cells can't move the mucus along, so everything sits. And, especially when somebody's sleeping at night, they sit, it just stagnates, and then you got to get that smoker's cough going. So that again is the body is kind of crying out for, that there's trouble going on. So it's just harsh on the airways.
And are they permanently paralyzed?
They can over time unwind that process. Okay. So it can happen. It takes, literally the one puff can, creates an issue in the moment. If somebody's smoking pack or packs a day kind of a thing, then the damage is done. That can be unwound, so you can restore health there over time, but it takes a while to kind of turn it back in reverse.
Okay. And with sleep apnea, you hear every so often someone dying from sleep apnea. Reggie White always comes to mind as Absolutely. A person who died. You mentioned that someone with sleep apnea is basically stops breathing a bunch of times during the night. Mm-hmm. So, one, is there a way for you to know that you have sleep apnea? That's my first question. My second question is, why is it that you wake up fine hundreds of, or I don't know how often it happens, and then one time you
Sure.
you don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think the what was the first part of that again? I've spoken in a second, but
I can you know that you have sleep apnea?
You can it. Oftentimes you don't know. Oftentimes you're the last person to know.
Even your partner can't tell?
Not necessarily, but sometimes they can. Sometimes, so there are some instances where somebody is obviously choking and gasping to breathe at night. More often, somebody's it's the snoring and then a pause and then the snoring picks back up again. And so it's not necessarily obvious. If this is how you've slept your entire life, sometimes you have the people who are most likely to have no idea what's going on is somebody whose airway has been compromised their entire life. And oftentimes it starts in childhood, which is a lot of people. And so we find, how do you know then? How you know is to do a sleep study. And a sleep study nowadays, it's a simple thing that you can do in your own bed. The technology has gotten really good. And so if somebody's wondering, man, maybe that's me, maybe I have sleep apnea, I don't know. The simple thing is for, with our practice at least, is it's easy to get somebody in, or nowadays we can do this online, see what, kind of understand, well, what are you noticing? We can look at somebody's airway, and then doing a sleep study in your own home is literally, a nothing kind of a thing. One night where you're putting a device on when you go to sleep, and then you send it back in, and that gives us the information. That tells us, are you pausing? Are you snoring? How often are you pausing? How low does your oxygen levels? How long do they go? All those things. Now we have understanding. Now we know exactly what's going on for you. And I've had it go both ways. I mean, more often than not, there's more of an issue happening than people realize. Sometimes it's dramatic. So we base it on how many times somebody's pausing breathing per hour on average over the course of a night. There are patients who do that over 100 times every hour. So every hour, their bodies, like every few seconds, their bodies are shutting down and they're stopping breathing at night. That's severe. But even in the mild category, somebody's doing that 15 to 20 times an hour. Well, that's still 15 to 20 times every hour that you're getting strangled when you're sleeping at night. How do you think that's going to, what kind of impact do you think that's going to have on your body? It's going to be really hard. The sad thing is, human beings are wired to live and survive, and even under duress and even under torture. And so if you're tortured, this is where it's kind of a weird concept, but if somebody comes in and tortures you on a regular, repetitive basis that you can kind of count on it like clockwork, people are really good at getting, beaten down, and they just kind of accept their punishment. If somebody, though, flip that around and say nobody's ever beat you, and all of a sudden now we're going to just kind of beat on you one night, you wouldn't put up with it. And yet people put up with it because it's night after night after night. And you just get lulled into the sense of, this is my life, this is my destiny. And I think that's, for me, again, the thing that gets me riled up is that that's not okay. It's not okay for somebody not to have the awareness that this compromise that's been put upon them is something that is not right, that we can do something about, and then when you do those things, it's sort of unleashing somebody to do what they're supposed to do in this world.
So when that happens, do you also? I mean, if it happens 100 times in an hour, that's very frequent. So when it happens, because you were saying before, when you start choking somebody, your heart rate goes up, and so is that happening every time that happens? So heart rate goes up, your brain's probably releasing adrenaline and cortisol because it's like, shit, I'm gonna die, and then it stops, and you go back to normal, and that's what's
the sort of the medical condition that's most likely to be correlated with sleep apnea, untreated sleep apnea, is hypertension, high blood pressure.
Okay.
So it's the same thing. Is that a surprise? No. That your body is constantly, it's the worst of all possible worlds, meaning that when you're sleeping at night, we kind of hinted on it. We haven't really talked about the good part of sleep, kind of focused on the bad with the breathing part, but your sleep is the time for your body to recover and restore itself, and to recover from the previous day, prepare for the next day. You're defenseless. Think about that. Think about our ancestors way back when in the wild. Imagine sleep has to be really important to take all your defenses down, put you in a fetal position, and sort of say, if you want to think about this, is the world is saying to you, this is so important that we're going to make you defenseless for a third of the day, sometimes a half of the day, because your brain needs this, your body needs this, because otherwise it'd be a ridiculous concept. But it is that important, and when that isn't happening, it's sort of both. It's the 180 degrees worse than that. Is not only are you never getting that restoration, never getting that sort of preparation for the next day. The flip opposite is happening. You are fighting for your life literally every few minutes during the course of a night. And so it's taking the time where your body is recovering or supposed to be recovering and making it a torture session. And then what happens to your body? Your body is wired and sort of always on defense because it never knows when that airway is going to shut down. And what happens? Your blood pressure ramps up because, and like I said, a lot of people don't really connect the dots here. And again, it's sad. But you see lives that are ruined from this. And yeah, I think the second question was on Reggie White and those sorts of sudden death kind of things. Yeah, they happen. Although I'd say the ones like Reggie where it happened and it was tied back to the sleep apnea, it's rare that it gets tied back to the sleep apnea. It's usually, we kind of coined this term too, or coined this concept, is sleep apnea is, in those instances, the thing that caused the death, caused this whole situation to happen, but it doesn't leave its calling card. I mean, meaning that what happens is somebody who dies at night because they had sleep apnea, on the death certificate, it doesn't say sleep apnea, it says cardiac arrest. Well, then you say, well, why? What was cardiac? Why did his heart stop? Well, his heart stopped because it had enough. And why did it have enough? Because his body, sort of gave up or wasn't able to withstand the constant barrage of torture and choking that was happening, and it gives up. So you don't die. Nobody has sleep apnea on their death certificate. They have stroke, a heart attack, uncontrolled hypertension. Even some of those mental health issues, are real and can end lives in many instances. But this has never happened in the history of the world is somebody's depression or anxiety that led them to do something that they shouldn't have been doing, that actually was being the underlying depression or anxiety that was caused by sleep apnea. Nobody would ever connect those dots, but it happens all the time. It happens every single day, multiple times in this country where people's lives are ending because of this. And in an adult, it's horrific. In a child, which is when this stuff starts, it's abusive. It's one of those things where a child and so many children suffer from these airway issues, and there is zero recognition of that in the medical community, which is it's just an abomination. And so I think that's where, for me, I've got fire and passion on this subject because somebody's got to have it. Somebody's got to get out there and let people know that, enough is enough, and that we can do things about this, and that this is a problem that needs a solution. We have those solutions. They're just not getting connected to the problems at hand.
And how can so understanding your sleep, as I understand sleep, my little wearable measures my sleep, and it tells me how much deep sleep I have, how much REM sleep I have, how much light sleep I have. Can you tell us what the differences are of those three? Because I think I know, but but I'm not 100% sure. And then what is someone with sleep apnea? What does their sleep look like? I'm imagining it's different than what my
right. And everybody's different to some extent, but kind of with there's various levels of sleep, and even so, it's just sleep is a weird concept because even to this day, science is still learning and trying to understand some of these things. So how these sleep stages came into being was monitoring folks as they're sleeping at night with EEGs. So you look at brain waves and see what's happening, and then you have to do it in enough people to figure out, because some people's sleep is really messed up, and but you get the norms. And so what should happen is should go from awake and then kind of descending into those various levels of, it's stage 1, 2, 3. There's actually medical terminology built around them, but what should happen is you should be cycling sort of from light sleep to deeper sleep, and then the ultimate, the REM sleep, which is where your body is truly getting the most restoration, requires, it's hard to describe, but you have to kind of cycle through enough that your body, and I don't know this to be true, but it seems like your body is sort of getting prepared for the good things that are going to happen with sleep. So what you'll find is that REM can happen early in the night, but it tends to happen the longer you sleep, the more episodes of REM that you're going to have, and the longer those are, and that's the best sleep.
Mine goes deep right away, like from
Right.
Yeah.
Which can be in its own issue. So it's sort of like this challenge because of, then you take somebody who's sleep deprived and, their sleep architecture is going to be disrupted. Now they might go to sleep right away and, but it's still, kind of not the way it's ideally supposed to be. Many folks who have sleep apnea never get into those deep levels of sleep.
That's
ever.
what I was thinking sort of just as I asked the question, because it would be impossible.
Right. It is. I mean, and so a lot of times, even for us, when we're treating somebody, this is something we obviously we're talking to throughout the process of treatment. But, a lot of times, for instance, if we get somebody's nose working that wasn't working before, many times they'll come in and say, oh, man, I've been dreaming for the first time in my life. I can remember my dreams. And that's great. Or certainly if you treat somebody's sleep apnea, that's an evidence that again, how do you, with a dream, if somebody's never dreamed or never remembers their dreams, how do you describe that to somebody?
Right.
Just imagine that.
Yeah,
Imagine somebody who's never had a dream in their life, and all of a sudden you can wave your magic wand, and now they're in a sleep, and they're going to dream every night. And they're going to tell you about that. And they're going to say, wow, look, I've dreamt for the first time. I'm dreaming now. It's amazing. And again, back to me and my little old me and my little old medical practices, you see that and you say, God, that's great that you're doing that. And we're so thrilled for you. On the flip side, how many millions of people are sitting out there right now in suffering? And they don't even know they're suffering because, again, if you've never had a dream, how do you describe a dream to somebody, like that's never had one? It's kind of weird and you're thinking about, you know what I mean? Like it's impossible.
It's like a mirage almost while you're asleep.
But so anyway, that sort of thing, if you have sleep apnea, you might have a dream here and there, but you're never, if it's untreated, you can't, because I guess if you flip that around is if your airway is compromised, your body has things on its mind like surviving the night versus allowing you to go in that deep restful sleep. So it's a fight or flight. We got to fight tonight. And every night it's we got to fight. And it's never we can just relax and check out. Yeah.
So for people that want to improve their sleep, so they snore, they know they snore.
Mm-hmm. Their
partner knows that they snore.
Right.
But haven't done anything yet. There is an answer for a lot of those people.
Mm-hmm.
How do they get a hold of you? And
yeah, I mean, for our practice, it's really easy. Our website, abthatknows.com, is the way to connect, and it's easy. I mean, we really try to. I mean, part of what we do from awareness of our practice and awareness of these issues is making sure I want my door to be wide open, and if you have these issues, it should be super easy for you to come to see us. So part of that's in our website design is we've tried to make it like as few clicks as possible. And there's basically wide availability, make it really easy, make it easy to get in the door, and then we can kind of figure it out from there, kind of a thing. So, basically go to the website. It's easy to set up an appointment. Nowadays, like I think I was saying before, you can do that virtually, which we this is a COVID thing, or since COVID, it forced us to move in that direction, which is a good thing for us that COVID happened, meaning that now we can actually, it's easier for people to come to see us.
Yeah, for people, it's like
absolutely.
The whole notion that I got to take off work and I have to. Nope. You just
exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of there's always an excuse. There's always an excuse, and so I get it. But I'd say there's at this point in this day and age, the bar for entry is, I mean, it's about as easy as you get. I mean, literally, you go to the web and we can see you on the web. And, sometimes our protocols at this point are, basically online appointment. We see you online. We send out a sleep study to your home, sleep with it, get the information. We can review that online. There's so much we can do without even having you in front of us.
Sure.
And that's a good thing. We have to get used. We as a practice have gotten used to that and we've implemented new technology to allow for that. But that's a good thing. And I hope that more people are going to sort of take advantage of that opportunity.
Well, Dr. Kandula, thank you so much for being on the Working Without Waste podcast. This has been very, very educational for me, and I'm sure for everybody listening. Breathing triangle, that's something I will not forget.
All right.
And if you do have an issue sleeping, that can be fixed.
Yep.
You deserve to sleep well, because sleeping well will not only make you more healthy, it'll make you more productive, and also make you live longer.
Correct.
All three good things.
All of them good.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
think about your family.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Kandula.
Thank you.